So, colleagues, thank you for taking your seats. I'm fully conscious that we are left with the last panel, which we were told has to be 45 minutes, and it's before your cocktail in the presidential room on the 12th floor. So we'll try and be speedy. Unfortunately, Nacho Sanchez Amor, who should be on this panel, is being called into committee to vote, but will join us as soon as he can. So he asked us to go ahead and start without him. You've seen him anywhere earlier this afternoon, and he will be possibly featuring again later in the cocktail and again tomorrow, so you will have a chance to hear him again. This panel is actually one of the few panels which has the title of the conference within it, so it's specifically on recommendations. And as the very fact that there is an international conference on the follow-up of recommendations is an indication that, in general, the international community over the past few years has been giving an increasing importance to the issue of follow-up. Certainly in the case of the European Union, we have for a number of years now started conducting follow-up missions to every country where we've had an observer mission. So midway, halfway through the electoral cycle, so 2 or 3 years after the elections, we send a follow-up mission to check the state of implementation of the recommendations. Now, of course, pushing for electoral reform, as you all know in this room, is not an easy task. Often simply the political will is lacking. Often it is other issues, it is legislative issues or simply the political situation in the country. But it's certainly the case that very often the political will is lacking to implement the recommendations. Now, in our case, but I'm sure also in other observers, and I know it's the case for other observers, we sometimes end up doing the same recommendations that we've done 4 years previously or 8 years previously. And this is especially true for a number of the issues which were discussed today and will be discussed tomorrow, such as online campaigning, political finance, data protection, and AI. I'm joined today on this panel by technically 3 speakers, but Sanchez Amor is not here, so 2 speakers, but who are excellent speakers and I'm sure will provide enlightening contributions. Olga Ivazovska, whom many of you know, is the head of the civil network Opora in the Ukraine. She is the co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory and the Center for War Crime Documentation in Warsaw. And Opora, as many of you know, is Ukraine's premier domestic election observer network and democracy think tank. Jorge Valladares Molleda leads the section on political integrity with Transparency International in Berlin. Prior to that, he worked with International IDEA, as several people in this room, I believe. I was on stage in their career. And in his home country of Peru, he was the coordinator of the civic movement Transparencia. Jorge has been an observer in missions for the OAS, for UNASUR, for the Carter Center, and a number of other organizations. Nacho Sanchez Amor, who I do not need to present but is not here, you all know is the lead member in the Democracy and Elections group in the Parliament, and I believe he will be joining us shortly, so when he does, he can join in the conversation. Since we only have 45 minutes, and possibly now only 40 minutes, I would start with a question to each panel member, and then I will follow up maybe with a specific question, and then I would give a chance to audience members, rather than to ask questions, since we know that questions from the audience are usually statements, to actually make your statement, and you will each have a chance for 3 or 4 speakers to make a small intervention towards the end. But perhaps we could start with Jorge. I would have a question as to how you feel that your experience with follow-up to election recommendations, what is your experience in that, and what you believe are the necessary elements for a successful follow-up. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you very much for this. It's really a pleasure and honor to be in this forum. And thank you, Adam, and his team for inviting me to join. Actually, Transparency International as such is an anti-corruption organization. The reason I'm here is because we sit at the intersection between elections and corruption, and that's campaign finance and abuse of state resources, of course. I wanted to mention this because then that also will bias my answer to the question on what elements are key for a successful follow-up. And I want to answer from the perspective of both political finance and an advocacy organization that tries to move the needle in not only at the global level, but also through its presence globally with chapters in more than 120 countries. Let me just focus on two of these things. The first one has to do with something that's being discussed very often when among international election observers, but also other domestic observer groups, and it has to do with what's that model, what's the reference, what's the global, what's the set of international commitments and obligations that should be referred to. There has been a lot of progress over the last years in trying to have a well-defined set of rules, except on political finance. Henry Mgusi mentioned this before, but I think I will get back to that because there are some good news. There may be something going on very soon this year, no later than December, at the next Conference of State Parties of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. But I just wanted to say that the reference to international commitments is important, but not only those international commitments that are confined to the field of elections or democratic principles. The anti-corruption world also has a set of principles, and there are several mechanisms in which countries signed and originate commitments, obligations, sometimes voluntary, very soft, that are often neglected or not mentioned in international election observer reports or follow-up missions. So one key factor that I wanted to stress first is that do consider that there is a set of soft law that exists. I want to mention one example that just from last week in Malawi. Malawi is a signatory of the African Union Convention Against Corruption. The Article 10b states clearly that every party to this treaty is, will enact transparency of political finance and combat illicit financing of politics. However, the report does not mention this and only mentions the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, whose mandate is only very soft and only asks for considering enhancing these laws. Not only that, Malawi also has submitted 2 national action plans with commitments on political finance that have not been mentioned. The second, and why is this important? Why is not just the reference to this? Why is this important? And I would say this is key for successful follow-up, because that would give us some legal standing to civil society advocates to actually bring those who omit to implement these international commitments to court or to face some legal accountability and implement this. I will just give the example, and with this I end, of India, that in 2017 or 18 established this electoral bonds scheme that basically made all corporate political financing secret and opaque. And ADR, the Association for Democratic Reforms, brought the law into question from the perspective of that the law violated the right of citizens to know who was funding this. The case was settled. The ruling is from February 2024, and it was a very successful case because this scheme that made corporate donations opaque was banned. The second case is Malawi. Malawi, where a 2018 law established the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, was never implemented, as in the EU reports from 2019. And the civil society organization with some statutory standing brought the registrar to court and actually managed to get a judicial mandate to establish that office and start creating some sort of transparency of political findings. So we need wording, and with this I end. Electoral observation missions could give us leverage because they could be the cheapest legal advice we can get to bring those who breach or omit to perform the functions to face some legal consequences and legal accountability in the country.
Thank you, Jorge. Olga, with the same question, if you want, in 5 minutes on your experience with follow-up to electoral recommendations and what you believe are the necessary elements for successful follow-up.
So, thank you. First of all, I didn't visit this event in the first time, and you moderated it a few times with me, and you know that I'm speaking longer than 5 minutes, but I'll try to be as short as possible, as brief as it possible now. So now we have a conference of friends. I don't believe that someone here are against free and fair elections, are against freedom of speech, are against human rights, and so on and so forth. And each time we are trying to advocate here in this room who are strongly pro to have free and fair elections with some tough regulations, but for the interest of the citizens of each of the country which we are presented now. So this is a little bit skeptical, if I may, to speak about this situation, because we have to speak with enemies, with those who are not pro, who are strongly against, and those who are not going to follow these rules in the future. Election observation mission recommendations should be implemented in a timely manner. Sometimes we had political windows of opportunities, but they are coming after the big positive elections, like it was in Ukraine in 2019, 2020s, when we had free and fair elections. In 2019, came to the power populistic political group, led by current President Volodymyr Zelensky. He was not so strong on our side. He didn't know a lot about international standards, about Venice Commission of Code of Good Conduct of electoral practices, or about OEC standards, and so on and so forth. He just followed the ratings of some of the policies which were popular. And first of all, people believed that free and fair election is a good tool to reload the power in their country, but they had the power to reload this power. And I have to say that the most successful years in my memory, in our history, was 2019, 2020s, when we had already prepared draft of the laws, some of the solutions, developed acts, and civil society had the power just to send these proposals to the new presidential administration, who was led by populists. And the parliament voted for all of these amendments and changes, and parliament voted for human rights, and parliament voted for a proportional system with open party list, which was recommended by Venice Commission for Ukraine, as I remember, 15 years ago. But what happened then? The so-called political window of opportunity was closed. Why? Because nobody are caring about electoral reform between elections. And this is not just about political groups, this is about citizens, because they are not caring about electoral reform on a daily basis. They are thinking about economical, financial issue, about education, medical care, and so on and so forth. That's why this topic are becoming a problem of so-called experts groups, who are not so powerful as citizens, who are not following by populistic politicians, and so on and so forth. So my first recommendation, to have not just recommendations, but developed legislation solutions, draft of the laws, draft of the acts, which will be helpful when the short window of opportunity will be open. Now we are following the new potential window of opportunity. What does it mean? That Ukraine got the candidate status, and we believe that we will be a member of EU in some years' perspective. And this year we developed so-called roadmap about democratic sustainable institutions. And there are a list of so-called deadlines, criteria and indicators, policies which have to be developed and adopted by Ukrainian parliament and government for having progress in fundamentals reforms. So what does it mean? that the collaboration between international organizations, sometimes it's about EU, European Commission, or Venice Commission, OSCE, ODIHR, and so on and so forth, and local NGOs who are working on the ground and knowing this political frame very well, will produce some solutions at the end. And these recommendations will be adopted not because it was written by OSCE ODIHR in 2020s, when we had last time national wild local elections, because Ukraine has war now and no elections during martial law period time, but because civil society advocated to have this norm in the roadmap for sustainability of democratic institutions in Ukraine for having progress in the EU accession process. So it means that each time we have to think not about so-called theoretical collaboration, but to listen in each other, because sometimes government can misuse this potential progress or potential window of opportunity and misuse some of the norms which are there in documents. But my last point, I had a lot of different recommendations, but my moderator is nervous already. So my last point is that everything is possible, but recommendations without tough work and hard work on the ground, with the sustainable support of those institutions who are not just writing the standards, but who are following and advocating in a very, very diplomatic manner, but with the tough carrots, may produce positive outcome at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. Since Nacho Sanchez-Amor hasn't arrived yet, I think we will have a second round and you will have a chance to continue on the points that you didn't get to raise in your first round. Nacho's just walked in now. Nacho, I'll give you a few minutes to settle down, and before I come back to you and ask you to speak, I'll go back to Jorge. Jorge, in your intervention, you referred to something that is in the works, and I wonder whether you could give us your views on what can the international community do to help countries to improve rules and stick to them, particularly in the area of political finance, which is one that you are working on at the moment.
Yes, indeed. In my original remarks, I had prepared a lot of information to make the case that campaign finance was very relevant. But I didn't have to use that information because it became clear from the previous discussions that this is an issue that is a top concern from most of you in your work, not only here in Europe, but connected to digital advertising, but also, as we all know, also in the case of Africa. Henry asked during the previous panel, one of the problems with political finance is that there is no such a thing as a common set of standards or international commitments and obligations. That is true. They are a bit scattered. I mean, globally speaking, there is only just a few in one UN resolution from 1991, 2 days after the Soviet Union was collapsing, and then the UNCAC Convention Against Corruption, etc. But these, since 2003, when the United Nations Convention Against Corruption entered into force, there's been this push or drive to bring transparency to campaign finance in all countries around the world. And indeed, since we know from the IDEA's political finance database, the number of laws on this has increased tremendously. They are still trying to catch up with what the new challenges are. However, practice on it is really terrible. And I can give the example of, perhaps Africa, that I know by heart, There are 49 signatories of the African Union Convention Against Corruption that establishes transparency. Only one country has the accounts of political parties and candidates online, and that is South Africa, that update. There are a few that gazette this information, so one can go to an office, pay a fee, and get the information. That really, in 2025, that helps very little with transparency. So, but then the implementation is very low. So this is what I wanted. This is all a long preamble to say that. So there are 4 governments and possibly more that will table a draft resolution at the next Conference of State Parties of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption to develop guidelines to implement Article 7.3, that is considered to enhance the transparency of political funding. And these countries are Norway, Mongolia, Ghana from Africa, and Albania. This is a very commendable effort, and this resolution will bring a very holistic approach to transparency. So it will not only speak about how the information should be published, but also what competences oversight agencies should have to unveil or like to reveal what is concealed, no? What is not reported, etc. Also to stop abuse of state resources, etc. But I wanted to say that there may be some blind spots in this resolution that I've managed to see a draft of it in a previous version. One of them is what's been captivating this audience, and is digital advertising. There is no reference to this specifically, and I believe this is an opportunity to bring some rules or some principles into such an important instrument for to give some guidance to countries around the world on how to regulate this. Second is another blind spot could be also the use of financial mechanisms to overcome barriers facing women to participate in politics. That is part of the UN Convention as well, and there is some presence about that. There is no mentioning of this. And there may be a few other issues that may be of relevance or an interest of the European Union and or the member states of the OSCE or ODIHR that you would like to perhaps put your attention to during the negotiations that start on the 1st of October. No? And then with a presentation, but the real informal negotiations start on the 14th, 15th of October. So I think this is an incredible audience to bring your attention to this, put forward some ideas, and perhaps you will hear from me in the following weeks.
Thank you, Jorge. I'd like to hear more from Olga on electoral reform, particularly at time of wartime. But if you allow, Olga, since Nacho's just settled down now, if you want to speak to us for a few minutes about your experience with follow-up to electoral recommendations.
Well, it's a very bumpy experience, because the way that the countries or the institution they receive our recommendations is very different, depending on various aspects. The first that I sometimes wonder is how the president of a country of a ruler is thinking, why the hell the Minister of Foreign Affairs convinced me to bring electoral mission that had been bashing me consistently for the misuse of administrative resources and for everything. And sometimes I say, who really decided to have a serious electoral mission? Of course, there are other Ministers of Foreign Affairs that are inviting our long-standing friends, fake observers, that's for sure. This is political tourists. They are always saying praising things. But sometimes to invite a serious electoral observation mission is a political risk for the politician who decided to do it. And then you have to manage this map, and for that reason, this is other reason, Holly, to have politicians on board. This is an old quarrel, friendly quarrel that I have with Holly and other colleagues. Then, first, you have been invited. You do your work properly, meaning inevitably, normally you have to criticize many things, and to criticize many things normally is more leaning on the attitude of the current or the incumbent president or government, and this is not sometimes well received. One of the coldest reception I always had as a leader of an observation mission was in Armenia. when we have to deliver the provisional result to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It was the most short and cold and unfriendly meeting that I had, because simply we did the things properly, and this is not always the best, let's say, visiting card for an authority. Other thing, the way in which a country receives the let's say, our recommendations, it depends on who won the elections. If the incumbents won the elections, it's one way, it could be uncomfortable, but at the end, okay, guy, you led your paper here, but I'm in the same seat I was a couple of months before, and then they are more, let's say, educated or kind, and okay, and then they have to decide if conduct or not some of our reform. If the opposition wins, we are always very welcome, because normally when we have an assessment about the election, normally there are more criticism on address to the incumbent authorities, and you are most welcome. I remember the last time I went to one country that you sent me to them, and I criticized harshly the fact that the government, after saying to the country, this has been the most peaceful elections, educated people, festive environment, but a curfew. Guys, you say it has been completely peaceful, not one single incident, people have been educated, the environment has been festive, and you decide to impose a curfew. And I criticized that, but because the opposition won, when I came back 2 months later, the Prime Minister said, did you notice in the local election, we didn't put a curfew? Okay, that's meaning it depends also on who won the elections. The executives are more strong, are more difficult to deal with the follow-ups, with our recommendation. The parliaments normally they are more open. They are more eager to conduct some reforms because we never ask for foolish things, and are more kind. The electoral administration, my experience is, inevitably we create some kind of close link with the electoral administration. It's the daily contact. They know the difficulty they have to overcome. They knew what we need. They are normally very kind, and they reflect in our papers what they need. And for that reason, the electoral administration normally, even if we have some criticisms, they are the institution of the country more supportive of our recommendations, because we always try to understand the difficulties we had to overcome. They are not involved with the campaign things, with the campaign financing. Probably they are failing in the oversight of the financing because they have no means. But they receive well our recommendations. The judiciary, it's a step back. It's not part of our struggle. Let's see if the government is sending some reforms to the parliament. Let's see if the political groups, they are advancing with some draft law about electoral reform, but they are not in any way antagonist, except if there is some pending case related to the results. But this is a more delicate thing, but as usual, they don't enter in the case if this is the case. That everything depends on the political will. Everything depends on the political will, and the political will is related to the sincerity of having an electoral mission. Meaning, I ask an electoral mission because it's the thing to do, I can do differently, or we really want an electoral mission to improve our system. If the political will is there, even if you have exercised a lot of criticism, okay, the field is fertile. You can work with the country. In other countries, and you can remember some of them, they receive the paper with a smile, with a clear design not to follow one single recommendation, even if they are asking again for money for conducting the same kind of nasty elections. It's up to us if we decide to continue financing elections after having an electoral mission, doing the things properly, and offering a set of recommendations, and not being followed, not any single one. I know there are other political interests. What I like to struggle against is, please don't use the electoral mission as an offer, as a gift, as a proof of engagement, disregarding completely what are the results of the electoral mission. If we are going, it's because we have to put pressure, political pressure, on the authorities, at least to pretend that they are doing something in the electoral field, but sometimes it didn't happen. In other cases, happy cases, there are really authorities, incumbent authorities, new authorities, really trying to do things better. And that the only key question is the political will to conduct the reforms in the way we propose or in any other way, but the political will to improve the electoral processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nacho. And my follow-up question to you would have been on political will, so you already answered it, so that's good. Thank you very much. But Olga, to come back, if I may, to the issue of electoral reform, particularly in situations of wartime, if you have a few more comments to make on this.
You will not believe what I'm speaking about now, because the worst and the most active period for me personally was this and previous year in electoral manners and with electoral topics. Why? Because new presidential administration in the US tried to share the statement that Ukraine doesn't have legitimacy when we are speaking about branches of power, because before Russia tried to spend as much resources as it's possible for mistrust to the government institutions in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And now my organization and many others are working hard on the topic how to defend the first post-war elections, or we will fail the state after the hardest period of our history, because the price of these elections will be very high, and the price of that democracy is very high for us. So I have to say that in Ukraine we are not holding elections today, and we didn't have a big elections from 2020s, but we are at war. That's why we don't have elections, and this is not a reason that Ukrainian society or Ukrainian government or Ukrainian president doesn't want to have elections, but because Russia invaded Ukraine and we have a martial law. A war driven by Russia's aggressive attempts to destroy our statehood, seize our territory, and erase the identity of our people. Some might say, why talk about elections when no elections are happening? After all, with no elections taking place, there is no immediate technological influence on them, and observer recommendations remain far from implementation. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Clear parallel exists between the methods used to influence elections abroad and those being used to manipulate Ukrainian society today, even in the absence of electoral process. The goal is consistence, to paralyze society, to divide it, to weaken resilience and populism and propaganda, erode trust in the state institutions, and manipulate emotional responses. Malicious actors, Russian funding and influence use the same mechanism everywhere. Platforms such as Telegram and TikTok have become channels for influence operations, recruiting the people who are ready to do awful things because of the payment by Russian forces, money laundering, and buying the loyalty of online opinion leaders. Where soft power and FIMI are not enough, drones and direct aggression are used to push society into irritation responses and forcing compromises on alternative norms. For instance, a drone attack on Poland, a NATO member, could provoke rational measures such as strengthening defense capacities and social cohesion and emotional reaction, including panic or willingness to support populistic groups promising security and peace within 48 hours. We must also understand that only through free and fair elections can citizens exercise their sovereign right to choose their leaders peacefully. This is about our political and civil rights. And this is about people's independent choice of the path of development, reforms and integration into Europe. But if a neighborhood authoritarian state first funds and promotes satellite candidates and then governors through them, what kind of sovereignty can we talk about? History provides a clear lesson. In 2013, Ukraine's fourth president, Viktor Yanukovych, refused to sign the association agreement with the EU after a conversation with Vladimir Putin. It's cheaper to take over a state through effective interference and election manipulation than to start a full-scale war against it. But if you are ready to give up sovereignty in hopes of sleeping without drones attacks, you will get both war and shame. Russian influence and funding must be countered through effective practices, a strong legal framework, adherence to updated international standards, and safeguards against manipulation. Even in times of crisis and war, reforms are not less important than defending democracy at home. Ukraine has actively participated in shaping the framework for democratic institutions and EU accession. In the 25 pages document on democratic institutions, the section titled Electoral Process sets a clear objectives to ensure that key international and European Union standards, as well as previous recommendations of OSCE ODIHR and Venice Commission, are taken into account, and there is a clear deadlines about that. Before the next electoral process begins, Ukraine must amend its legislation to implement the recommendations of OSCE ODIHR election observation missions, as well as European Union standards. Of course, this is only one of many obligations. Yet, given that EU accession is now discussed as the key security guarantees for Ukraine at the highest level of government and within the coalition of willing, it's very important for Ukrainian society to have progress in electoral reform and to have defend system for the first post-war elections. This is not only a question of integrity, it is a question of security. And not only for Ukraine. You have to understand that Ukraine is a very bad example for all of you, because if you are not willing to be independent, you have to fight for that, for being independent from those thought sides or states who are willing to interfere in your political life. And if they will fail that interference, they will use another tools. So that means that to be together, framing by standards and paying resources for defend our security, independency and free and fair elections, we will be much more protected from the physical aggression. So I was a little bit nervous because at the end of the day, sorry for that mistakes in my reading exercises, but I believe that you understood my main message that the first post-war election, EU integration, association agreement for Ukraine, there were a lot of different carrots and a lot of different mission-driven objectives, which were supported by Europe, but first of all were supported by Ukrainians, because more than 90% of Ukrainians believe that Ukraine has to be a member of EU, and only then we will be enough protected from the another waves of aggression by our neighbor. And this neighbor will be near us for decades or centuries. It means that we have to be stronger than just to have a feeling that everything ends because they have effective system of interference in Europe. And I hope that Moldova will be protected. I hope that Romanian case will be will be a good lessons learned for all of the institutions who have resources, who have brains, and who have so-called political will. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga, and thank you for highlighting the essential work that Opora and civil society at large is doing in Ukraine in preparing the first post-war elections. We only have a very few minutes left on this panel before we hand over to the two co-hosts of the meeting to do a wrap-up of the day. But I was going to put a question to the audience, but we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left. But the question is, given that we've looked at many digital issues today, how do you think we can work better with tech companies to promote clearer and more responsible rules? To give you a few seconds to think about that, and if any of you have an answer to that, maybe Nacho, you want to give a politician's answer to that?
We talk a lot. We talk a lot about this issue in the first panel. It depends if it is an European company or if it is an American company protected by the policies of Trump. We have been explained today, my colleague Sandro Rossi, in which way they dealt with the big tech before and after Trump. And before Trump, they tried to manage, they tried to change our law, they tried to act lobbying. After Trump, it's simply we have a shield, we have a champion, and forget about interference. And when we exercise our rights to protect our citizens, J.D. Vance came to Munich to say you are violating the freedom of expression in Europe, feeding the same narrative of the extreme right in Europe, meaning we, the government, trying to protect the will of the voters, trying to protect the children and many other goods that we have to protect, we're doing so and obliging the companies to do normal things, risk assessment and that kind of things. We are destroying the democracy. We are anti-democrats because we are not protecting the freedom of expression. And we have to counteract the J.D. Vance and the little J.D. Vances we have all around Europe, trying to say, no, we are the democracies. Guys, we are the democracies. America is now a defective democracy, unhappily, but this is the case. Let's be reassured in our principles, values, and procedures, because we don't take executive orders saying stupid things overnight. We have procedures, we have parliaments, we have control, we have a free press, we have a critical public opinion. Everything, a big crunch of this is simply disappearing in the United States. And for that reason, the only way we can tackle is to use our legal means, but knowing that against our will to protect the citizens of Europe, there is a strong political hurricane wiping out human rights and principles and values all over the earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Nacho. Don't know if anyone still has the guts to intervene after that, but if any member of the audience would like to answer the same question about improving relations with tech companies, you can have a minute each. Armin.
Neil, thank you. I take up the challenge. I see three points here. One is absolute transparency, and I think that was clear from the first panel especially. The second is to regain the public space for the political debate, meaning we also need the public broadcaster, and the third is independent investigative media. And, that should rule then how very large online platforms and social media platforms are regulated, and there needs to be an oversight of that.
Thank you very much, Armin. I don't see anyone else raising their hands. Oh, yeah.
And I promised I wouldn't intervene today because I'm a little delirious, but I feel like this question comes up a lot, and I think we also need, it's always about how do we work with the platforms better? How do we get them to listen to us? How do we, and like, I mean, I think we all know like the tech companies are not going to save us. And I think that that's something it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying, but I think it's also being creative about how do we build other kinds of accountability, in terms of like, how do we build accountability around, for instance, political contestants or third parties that are abusing online technology or whatever? It's not just the tech platforms that we should be targeting. It's also kind of creating other kinds of disincentives for participating in bad behavior. But I think I don't think we can depend on our relationships with the tech platforms ultimately fixing much of anything.
Oops. Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much for that. I believe we should wrap up now so as to allow our two... Oh, sorry. Apologies. Who? Oh, sorry. I hadn't seen you over there. Yeah, please come in.
Very short, and just not to be so long. Gazmend, a guy from Society for Democratic Culture from Albania. I wanted to notice some cases that even we, Albania, are on the way to join EU, and we had elections this year. According to the report of OECD, but also civil society reports, no free and fair elections, and also the pressure and also use of administrative resources is a big problem. Even also the social media is not regulated, our websites, and so it's so difficult to observe and just to monitor closely the use of state resources. But previous elections, the Prime Minister closed TikTok. It was not because of the elections, but because of some other cases, and so. And even our organization have been very close to contribute for the electoral reform. We are listened, but then at the end they do not take into consideration our recommendation and so. But now the new government, maybe anybody has this news that we have in our government the first minister, AI minister, that nobody knows what's the function of this minister, but we'll learn maybe at the end of the year. But I do think that this is the idea of our Prime Minister, and so. So it's not we do our job even now that we do not have financial resources. We do voluntarily, but when we recommend something, it is not taken into consideration from the government, from the parliament, or mostly Central Election Commission is working better, but regarding the political will, it is not like cooperative. Thank you.
Yeah, just 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Olga would like to come in.
So all of these debates are very, very useful, but we have to stop to fight with the symptoms, because social media is just a channels, just a tool. Sorry, but money is just a money. It's just a resource for have more influence on society. And we have to understand, if we will not collaborate and cooperate against final beneficiaries, and this collaboration will not be painful, powerful, effective, we will be fighting against symptoms for many decades. So let's follow in not just money, but those who have the profit from this misusing of their power. And let's follow in those third sides, first of all, third countries who are trying to misuse elections against independence and sovereignty of the countries, then it will be successful. This campaigning will be successful. But again, let's follow in not resources and tools, but final beneficiaries.
Thank you very much. Nacho, please. Closing words from Nacho.
Yeah, because there are the example of two candidate countries. By the way, in Albania, I remember one election in which, before starting the counting, not one single ballot box was opened. Every party was celebrating the victory outside with the cards and the honks and so on. Two candidate countries.
This is traditional in Albania, celebrating after victory and so on.
I knew
each party.
I was seated in a schoolyard for 4 or 5 hours waiting for the counting to start. Two candidate countries to be members of the European Union, and the electoral mission are conducted mainly by OSCE ODIHR. It's politically impossible that the European Union has a minor role in the electoral missions in the candidate countries. I'm not talking about the OSCE area. I'm talking about the candidate countries. The candidate countries, they do an integral striptease. The administration, the judiciary, every procedure, everything is put under the lenses. And then the electoral missions, we are only sending a short mission for 5 days. We always trust, and we continue to trust, OSCE ODIHR work. That has to be clear. We never try to do differently. We decided politically many years ago to accompany the OSCE ODIHR missions in the OSCE countries. But related to the candidate country, it's quite strange not having another format of the participation of the European Union in the elections, because the accession process is an exam on the democratic standards, and one core part of the democratic standard are the elections. And for that reason, I think we have to rethink in which way the European Union is involved in the electoral missions in the candidate countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nacho. And now I think we really and thank you to all members of the panel, all three of you. Thank you very much for your insightful contributions. I think we should give a chance now to our co-hosts, Stephanie Schiefer from EPD and Gonzalo Mendoza from the Parliament Secretariat, to wrap up the day's discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, and the panelists and the whole conference. I will not really wrap up. We had a wonderful wrap up of the first panel for Armin and the second for Barbara. And what was said now was impressive for itself and stands for itself. I want to pass best greetings from Cristina Castagnoli. She's ill. Unfortunately, she cannot be here today and tonight. But her wonderful team is here, and I want to express my gratitude again to Daniela and to Nikas and to the whole team from the DEC for hosting us, election observers and tech experts here, data experts, for this discussion, which I think is super fruitful and helpful and important. What I just take away, and I take very much away from this day already, is that the frontiers, or maybe the difference between established democracies, new democracies, accession countries, EU members, is blurred in the question we are talking about. We are all in the same boat. Each country has its specific challenges, but we have not these traditional differences which have been a little bit characterizing the EPD as a platform. So we are really in a situation where we can exchange our experiences, and I'm very grateful being in this group of EPD where we really learn, and we learn maybe the most of those who are in the direst situation, in the most difficult situation. Yeah, and now I would say I would like to invite all of us to the reception, which will take place from 7 o'clock now, and we can move all together to this reception. And we have some nice stewards. They are here, yeah, the stewards. They already accompanied you here, and now they will accompany all of us to the reception, right? And before we go to the reception, we will take a photo, yeah? if it's fine for you. So our photographers, they know where to put us, and then yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, from the side of the European Parliament, just a few words. First, greetings also to Christina, who couldn't be with us today. Thank you very, very much to the EPDE for bringing this event to the European Parliament. Thank you to Armel and to Neil, who work intensively on democracy support and on election observation and showcase the interinstitutional cooperation that we carry out. And special thanks to Nacho Sanchez-Amor and the rest of MEPs that were here today. I would only like to make 3 comments as a wrap-up of today's session. The first one is that everyone has recognized that we live in a very complex geopolitical context, and that there is deep political polarization in our democracies, which is exacerbated by algorithms. Many of us have also recognized that in the context of election observation, there's, as Nacho stated very well, malign or fake observation efforts to undermine the democratic processes in the world. So in this relation, it's important that the community of international election observers continue to operate together and strengthen their cooperation. And we have the Declaration of Principles and the Code of Conduct, which is a good tool to identify what's good observation and what's not good observation. Secondly, it was recognized also that citizens are very worried about the state of democracy worldwide. A recent Eurobarometer also showcased that EU citizens are deeply concerned about the false and misleading information that's spreading around in social media. Even if the EU lacks direct competence in the electoral processes, it has taken steps in response to citizens' demands in several areas to tackle all these issues that have an impact in electoral processes. And I think that we're setting a golden standard in this regard that many countries can follow in this line. And the third comment is on election observation recommendation. This is something that we need to continue to work on. What it's clear to me from the discussion is that institutions and organizations that do election observation, they really need to integrate the follow-up of the recommendations in the policy making that they do and the bilateral relations with third countries to be impactful in the development of democratic processes all over the world. And so to conclude, we have a nice reception waiting for us in the 12th floor. First the picture, but again, thank you very much, EPD, the colleagues, Stephanie, Thomas, Adam, Teofil, and everyone else, especially also thanks to Daniela Recinella, who was the soul in the logistical aspects of this meeting. Thanks a lot.